Okay, good morning, Dad. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd, and Trump has been president for 2 days. And how is he doing in your estimation?
Well, he has done an awful lot. I mean, he followed up on the inauguration with a flurry of executive orders, and a number of those were quite significant. I think some of them are silly, like the renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
That's the one
Yeah,
I like.
yeah, yeah. That's for the big time wrestling crowd or whatever they call that now. Um, but many of them were significant. The pardoning of the July, not July, but January 6th rioters. I don't even think it's fair to call. I think it's fair to call some of them rioters, maybe even most of them. But but not all of them. And many of them were not even rioters, and they should not have been persecuted and locked up in the way that they were. So I think that was a good thing. That's my own opinion, and it's significant. It really is. Then there are some we'll say there are some executive orders that are potentially very significant, like the one against censorship. And there are other similar ones, that he is really directed at all the agencies of the U.S. government. Now, he needs to follow that up, and I think he is. I think he's instructed his attorney general to review the agencies and their practices. So that could have a real impact. They just said, you can give an executive order, but it can just disappear into the bureaucracy if you don't follow up. And so we'll see how the follow up is, if indeed these are implemented. Because, certainly like in the Biden administration, they would never admit to censorship. It's easy to pretend that you're not committing censorship. So you do need somebody overseeing these agencies and making sure that they are not engaged in any form of support for censorship. So I've always said that on the domestic front, I was expecting some significant policy changes, and I think that these first 2 days are evidence of that. I think we will see some real changes on the domestic front. Now, it's unclear what's going to happen on the foreign policy front. We have mixed signals, and let's just start off with the Middle East. I think two of those orders actually related directly to Palestine. One was the lifting of sanctions on extremist settlers in the West Bank. These are the people that chop down olive trees and harass the local Palestinians, more than harass them. Sometimes they burn down their houses. Sometimes they shoot them. So those sanctions have been lifted. That means that they had a slap on the wrist under the Biden administration. That slap actually has now been canceled. They are free to rampage. That's what that. I think that clearly signals that there are no constraints. Settlers do what you want.
What did the existing sanction really do? Because it kind of felt like the extremist settlers were free to
Yeah,
rampage regardless, right? So,
right. I think it just may be like it would only really affect them if they traveled to the United States. Yeah, so it really didn't have an effect on them. But now
more of a
even that
label.
very yeah, maybe. So even that very minor, again, I called it a slap on the wrist, that has been eliminated. And another thing, there were apparently some restrictions on 2,000-pound bombs, the dumb bombs that kill numerous civilians. There's no way to avoid that when you use a bomb that size. I remember back in the summer, there was a story about the Biden administration temporarily putting restrictions on those 2,000-pound bombs. I thought that they had been lifted, but apparently there were still some restrictions in place. Clearly the Israelis were still getting them because they used them to devastating effect in Lebanon, in Beirut. The decapitation strikes that killed so much of the Hezbollah leadership and so many civilians. It must also be pointed out. So these are both those are seem to me clear signals. Israel, do what you want. Don't worry, about civilian casualties or persecution, of Palestinian residents of the West Bank. And then another thing that happened, I believe it was yesterday, was that Trump's pick for UN ambassador, Stefanik, was confirmed. And I learned more about her. I knew that she was an extremist. It sounds like she's actually really kind of closely allied with the Smotrich Ben Gvir wing of Israeli politics. She refuses to refer to the West Bank as the West Bank, as Judea and Samaria. And she just will not recognize that Palestinians have any kind of rights at all. I mean, that's the kind of extremist that Trump has appointed to the UN. So all of that is very discouraging. Let's be honest. But then there's one little glimmer of hope, and this is kind of typical of Trump. Sort of like there's, I don't know really how to explain it, but this is what we see with Trump all the time. Apparently, he's appointed a man, Michael Domino, who used to be an intelligence analyst and a counterterrorism agent for the CIA. He's appointed him as the chief of Middle East policy for the Pentagon. And this guy has, this was according to Sputnik, but he had actually spoken out against or had urged the U.S. administration, that would be the Biden administration, to put pressure on Israel to allow more relief trucks into Gaza. And he also spoke out against U.S. participation in strikes on Iran. So it sounds like, he's over at the other end of the spectrum within U.S. politics, anyway, from Stefanik. So what does this all mean? All in all, I think you have to say that I don't think we're going to see any major shifts. But again, because, as I pointed out earlier, Trump is unpredictable. He has a strong personality. There's always a chance that we will. But just all in all, if you look, the vast majority of his appointments and, the things that he said about Israel. And let's not forget, actually, on the day of his inauguration, up there on the dais with him was none other than Miriam Adelson, who gave him $100 million, basically, to adopt the extreme Zionist positions, which he seems to be glad to do.
I don't know. Can we say if he's really, glad to adopt? Okay, so there's some of these things like the removing the restrictions of the 2,000-pound bombs, the removing of the sanctions on the extremist settlers in the West Bank. Those are disappointing things. Those are bad things. But the reality is, I don't think that really changes things that much because, like you said, there were still being 2,000-pound bombs being dropped on Beirut and Lebanon. They used them in Gaza. It didn't seem like there was any shortage of U.S. bombs. And the same thing with the settlers. They were harassing and killing Palestinians in the West Bank with seemingly impunity this whole time. I don't think there's much of a change there.
Yeah.
I think it comes...
Right. I'll just say that I think, right, I don't expect to see a substantive change. It's maybe more a change in style. And that's always been true, I think. That was true of Trump during his first term. It's just that the U.S. had a policy of really supporting Israel in everything, and it has had that policy more or less for decades. But at the same time, maintaining this pretense that we were neutral and that we wanted to see a just and equitable solution. We wanted to see the Palestinian state and all that. But I think that was just always a pretense. It was a smokescreen. And it's just with Trump, the smokescreen goes away and you just get the naked truth, which was already there. And so like under Biden, these were mostly symbolic moves to try to attempt to appease, the Democratic base that was concerned about what's happening in Gaza and about the persecution of the Palestinians. But they were just basically symbolic. Yeah, I mean, they have some effect, but it's very much, I think you're correct about that.
Right. So really then, if we're just looking at these two positions, the Stefanik as the UN representative and then Domino as the Middle East Pentagon official, right? So
right.
In my mind, I think the Pentagon one is the more important one. Would you agree?
Well, potentially. In a way, the ambassador is supposed to simply do the bidding of the president, and so I guess that somebody like a chief of policy in the Pentagon potentially has more power to change policy, to engage in, let's say, intra-administration politics, and so we hope. And then there's also the fact that he really does cut against the grain. So it's like, okay, yeah, probably Stefanik is there. Why? Because Miriam Adelson is sitting behind him on the dais, and that's right. Part of the deal. And kind of everybody knew that. But he or somebody in his administration smuggled in this other guy who clearly is not the sort of person that an Adelson would want in a position like that. So that suggests that there's at least a potential. I don't know. I don't think we really can get our hopes up, but there's a potential that we may see some changes for the better in the upcoming 4 years.
Right. I mean, the real fear in the Middle East is that if the U.S. tries to go to war with Iran, so having somebody in the Pentagon that is at a high level that has a firm stance that war with Iran is a bad idea, I think that's substantive.
Yeah, I think it is. Well, and I think actually, like we've pointed out many times, that has actually consistently been the position of the Pentagon. In this whole matter, it's really, you find the realists tend to congregate in the Pentagon. And that may actually explain his appointment. Maybe somebody, like ask, hey, you guys in the Pentagon, could you, recommend somebody for this position? And there were enough people in the Pentagon that really do not want to see war with Iran. I think that's been the majority position there for a long time. They very gladly pointed to this guy because they figured, okay, he'll strengthen our position. Maybe he got in there under the radar from, it's not really somebody the administration wanted so much as somebody that the Pentagon wanted. But, but that's still good. It shows that, they're that realist position, that realist faction. It's more than a faction. I think it's really the majority at the Pentagon has been strengthened.
Didn't Trump make some proclamation or order about no more foreign aid to any of these conflicts? Is there something to that?
Right. Well, I think no more foreign aid actually to all countries in the world except Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. And why Jordan and Egypt? Because they're just being bribed to support Israel. Those are sellout governments that cooperate with Israel because they're bribed by the United States. So we got to continue to give them the bribes. That's the foreign aid. And now there's a big question about how that affects Ukraine. And it's not clear if it's going to have an impact. It may, because again, like that package, that's $61 billion that were allocated to Ukraine, I don't think that's affected by this. And most of that's been used up, it's true. But they were going to have to vote a new package anyway. Now, I guess there are some other like budgetary items that were not part of that and may have been part of pre-existing foreign aid, and those might be affected. They should be, under law, but we'll see.
How long could Ukraine last if the U.S. no longer gave foreign aid to it?
Probably just a couple of weeks of even that. I mean,
really?
Yeah, Ukraine. Well, of course, there's a lot of aid that comes from Europe, too. But it's a combination of the aid from Europe and the U.S. that is keeping Ukraine alive. It's basically a zombie economy. It would not... it's only functioning because of the constant infusions of foreign funds. Without that, the economy would have collapsed a long time ago. And I think it also should be pointed out that the army would have collapsed. Everything... The only reason that Ukraine is still in the fight is that, it's essentially... it's on life support that's provided by the West.
And do you think the Europeans would step up and pick up the slack if America pulls out and says, we're not? I mean, are they even capable of that?
I don't know if they're capable. They are capable theoretically, but I don't think politically they're not capable of it, because it's as we've seen, there is a growing resentment to aid that's being sent to Ukraine within the European countries. And, parties that are who are in favor of stopping the flow of aid to Ukraine are growing in power through much of Europe right now. So I think that people like Scholz are starting to realize that. Olaf Scholz in Germany say, hey, this is the problem here. We're gonna actually be booted out if we don't slow down, because this is just not. nobody's happy about this, or not among the populace. It's an elite commitment. It's not a popular commitment. Yeah, let's see. Interestingly, I was going to point out something. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, you say that Ukraine is a zombie economy and that it would collapse in a couple of weeks if the U.S. and the West pulled out. That should be an obvious, clear problem, right? Don't Western politicians recognize, well, what's the plan? Clearly this can't go on forever. So I just don't understand why they're wanting to throw, more good money after bad, kind of double down. Don't they? Surely they've understood the sunk cost fallacy.
No, I mean, these people are just not very rational. I think it's just, it's emotional. They've demonized Russia to the point where they can't back out. They've made these ridiculous claims that, Russia is ruled by a madman who is hell bent on conquering all of Europe. Some of them have said things like this. And you say that kind of thing, and maybe you actually believe what you're saying. You just cannot. What do? You say, okay, well, let's allow the madman now to conquer the rest of Europe. That's they've created a rhetorical, or painted themselves into a rhetorical corner where there's just really no alternative. The only, that all they can do is continue to double down and triple down, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's insanity. Well, just going back to the inauguration a little bit, I'm wondering. What I thought was kind of interesting seeing this inauguration were just the photos coming out of it. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I'm just seeing some clips online. But you see people like Joe Rogan, Tailthon, Mike Tyson, Logan Paul. You got the tech CEOs. You got Elon Musk being very autistic, giving some questionables. My heart goes out to you. Right. It's interesting seeing this group that kind of have surrounded themselves around Trump, because this is not the deep state anymore. Traditionally, whenever we see these inaugurations or these, you just have your kind of soulless, men in suits that we don't know what they do and they just run the government. But here we have something different. And I know Biden when he left, he made this warning like, oh, we have to watch out of U.S. descending into an oligarchy. And I'm wondering, do you view that in any sense when you see all these popular figures and tech giant CEOs that there is an oligarchy, or has there always been an oligarchy, or is what we're having here clearly an improvement over the faceless deep state? How do you kind of view this new? It's definitely a new face that we have in America.
Right. It's right. Well, I guess I first of all want to point out that in Biden's farewell speech, yeah, he had that reference to, I guess, what did he refer them to as the tech giants or whatever? He was clearly trying to echo Eisenhower in his famous farewell address in 1960 when he referred to the military-industrial complex, and where that actually, kind of entered the lexicon. That term did. I thought it was silly because, throughout his tenure, his 4 years in office, his administration had worked very closely with the tech giants, right, to clearly impose censorship, to suppress certain kinds of information, and to boost other kinds of information. That was clearly what he was doing. Now he's talking about the great threat of some sort of new oligarchy.
You got
oligarchy. I'm sorry. Okay. Some sort of new oligarchy, an alliance between the government and these tech giants. And I think he's saying that for two reasons. The main reason is Musk, right? Because Musk is clearly stepped out from the shadows and become an advocate, and a very close ally of Trump. And then, of course, Musk, he doesn't own, he owns X. And then recently Zuckerberg has come out. He's not made himself an ally of Trump by any means, but he has acknowledged that he was engaged in censorship. And I guess this is apparently his great sin, that he was not supposed to do that and continue working hand in glove with the government, like he did through most of Biden's 4 years. But he has now said, okay, yeah, well, let's say, for example, I guess that he decided to eliminate the positions of fact checkers. He said, this just isn't working. It's clear that people are unfairly censored through this. We just can't do this anymore. And it just seemed to be a very reasonable, moderate, and not, in no way was it pro-Trump, but that was considered a threat by Biden. And it just shows the kind of thinking that characterizes him and his administration and a lot of his supporters among the Democrats. And I guess actually there's a third a third factor or a third individual that I think that Biden is responding to, and that's Jeff Bezos. And Jeff Bezos, of course, is the owner of the Washington Post. And during this last election, they decided not to write an editorial in support of the Kamala Harris candidacy. And this led to I believe hundreds of thousands of people canceling their subscriptions, which just seems to me ridiculous. It's just something that's wrong. Yeah. You're expecting that, you're not looking for a newspaper, you're just looking for basically, a propaganda organ in support of the Democrats. And he decided, there really haven't been major changes in the reporting, that you see in the Washington Post, but just the fact that he did that, elicited a great deal of anger. So, with the exception of Musk, Musk has obviously made himself an ally of Trump. But at the same time, I don't think anybody's demonstrated that his, X has now become become just sort of an instrument of Trump. I mean, he expresses his own opinions, but he allows other people to express theirs too. I mean, I think he has been overall, and there were some obvious exceptions, but overall he has been an honest advocate of free speech. But free speech is considered dangerous by people like Biden. And so that's why he had to give his warning at the end. And I think it's just silly, but that's his thinking and the thinking of many people on the establishment left.
Another thing that Biden did just right in his final minutes was do a slew of pardons, extending to Anthony Fauci and his family. And what was interesting about these pardons is that they extended back to 2014, which of course was the Maidan coup. It was also the time when I believe Obama put the ban on gain of function research, which they say is what led that Fauci subverted by going to places like, Wuhan, for
Wuhan,
this. Right. Wuhan, oh yeah. So Wuhan is where my Chinese partner lives, Wuhan.
Okay.
So I got confused. Anyway, so is there some significance to this, that this is do you look at this as some time of almost admission that they were involved in something shady? And why did it start in 2014? Why does the pardon go from 2014 to...
Well, it's very suspicious, especially 2014. I think in the case of pardoning family members, he's protecting them, but he's also protecting himself, because if these people, Hunter Biden, brought into court and questioned, there's a chance that a very good chance that evidence against Joe Biden would be revealed in court, and he doesn't want that to happen. I think that's what you're looking at, and I think your explanation of the pardon for Fauci is probably correct. There may have been some discussions with attorneys and say, he's actually vulnerable on this, and so he got this pardon.
Right, but I thought a pardon was supposed to be forgiving somebody of a crime that they've been
normally
that they've
it
committed,
is.
Right? Like, how do you pardon somebody for something that nobody's been right? So legally, does that even work? Can I just pardon? So you're pardoned from all potential, sins that you might have committed in the past. Is what you're saying, right? How does that work? Can you give a blanket pardon like that? That's never been done before, has it? Or
I can't say that. I don't know if it ever has been done. I don't recall it ever happening before. I think if it has happened, it's been very rare. So this is quite unusual that there are so many of these pardons. Apparently it is legal. There's nobody coming out there and saying, hey, this is not, this doesn't have any uh, well, let's say this is not constitutional. Nobody's arguing that. Apparently, it
I
can be
am.
done. Okay. um, um, yeah, the excuse that Biden gave was that he was going to protect these people from politically motivated prosecutions by Trump. Again, I think this may be a case of projection because I think any honest observer has to understand that that's something that the Democrats, did. These were, and I think it applies to the vast majority of these January 6th prisoners too, or ex-prisoners now. These prosecutions were politically motivated, and maybe it's just sort of like he's afraid that, okay, yeah, we did this. He's not saying it this way, but I think maybe at some level he understands that these were politically motivated. So there's a chance that Trump might retaliate, and that's at least the excuse that he's giving.
Yeah, Trump is really, playing up this new golden age of America, that we can rebuild and bring back prosperity and bring back some sanity and common sense. Do you believe that this is possible, that we can have a golden age, or because we've talked about this before, the $36 trillion in debt, but we do have a very unusual, unorthodox administration. Is it possible that they could go through and clean house, got a lot of the fat that's accumulated in the political system, and we can see a change? There's also talking about, unleashing American energy and all these things I think could be good for the U.S. and the world. Are you more hopeful for the future, or are you just still cynical, Dad?
I'm still a cynical old man here. Again, I think that he already, like, some of these executive orders I think were clearly good and will have a beneficial effect. Again, like the attack on censorship, I think it's encouraging. At least that tells, for at least the medium term, I think we're going to see an opening up. There was a sense that one had, especially during the Biden administration, that there's a sense of suffocation. That there was, especially during that really began in the COVID years, but it just continued. There was this clearly an effort to really crack down on dissident speech, and there was even, I remember under Biden, he tried to create some sort of board of disinformation or something or whatever, and that was shot down. There was real resistance, and that's good. That's one area where we have actually a healthy dissent, and I think it does it. That frustration with all these efforts to censor speech is part of what brought Trump into office, and it looks like he's making good on that. And just opening up the political arena to a freer debate, to the online communities to a freer debate. I think that could only be good. And it's reason to give us hope. Now, but there's so many problems that are so deeply entrenched that I just don't know if it really is possible for this administration to make a significant difference. I think you mentioned the $36 trillion debt, for example. I mean, that's going to be the solutions to that problem. I think are so painful as to be politically just impossible. So I think that's only going to continue. It's only going to get worse. And at some point, we will see some sort of a severe economic crisis. I think there's just it's just mathematically inevitable. The big question, I guess, is whether it will happen during Trump's term or the next term. We'll see.
Mm-hmm.
Then on foreign policy, again, I've expressed my opinion. I don't think we're going to see significant changes, but we may see some minor improvements here and there. Maybe especially in the case of China.
Okay, yeah, I hope so. Something that I've wondered sometimes is that if you're the president, you're commander in chief of the entire armed forces, this is a $1 trillion war machine that it hasn't been doing the United States any good. I don't see any credible argument that can be made that our war machine, our military industrial complex has made the U.S. safer. On the contrary, it seems like it's done the opposite. Meanwhile, the U.S. infrastructure is in terrible shape. Our cities are bad. We don't have any high-speed rail. Our old rail is falling apart. Trains are falling off their tracks. Bridges are collapsing. We can't even protect ourselves from natural disasters. Fires and hurricanes are kicking our butt over here. If I was in charge, could you just say, like, okay, I got this $1 trillion army. Hey guys, let's start building roads and look inwards. Let's build build the wall if you want to do that to protect your borders. Let's build some high speed rail. Could you turn the your military into some civilian function? Because and you can make arguments that you can still be doing research, but you have a goal that you're working towards, and you can still work on development. And I don't know, need to drill a hole through a mountain. You use some explosives. I don't know.
I don't use an F-16. Actually, right. I think there probably are legal barriers to doing that. I think you can actually have, of course, U.S. military defending the border. That's part of their duties, under the Constitution. But I don't think you can just have them building high-speed rail. I might be wrong. Maybe there's a way to do this, but I suspect that there are legal barriers. But that is one thing, to be honest, where a president could make a real improvement that's essentially cost-free, at least in the medium term. In the short term, I think there will be costs, but you could cut way back on our military. We clearly spend way too much, and we don't need to. Now, again, we are probably the most secure nation in the world because we have pretty much a whole continent to ourselves. And we have, oceans, the two major oceans of the world on both sides of us. We do not need the military that we have. And the only reason that we have it is that we've chosen to pursue, this globalist hegemony. And if we would choose just to set that aside, it would be greatly to our benefit. Peace could break out in many parts of the world. I'm not going to pretend that it's, that there won't be any more wars. Obviously, there will be. There are always tensions and rivalries and so forth. But a lot of these tensions and rivalries actually have not been suppressed or prevented by our global empire. They've been exacerbated by it. And so we could do that with benefits for the world, but most of all for ourselves, because this is just money that's being thrown down a big pit. It doesn't increase the prosperity of the average Americans at all, not in the least. It helps the arms manufacturers, but again, not the average citizen, not at all. But I don't see that happening, unfortunately. I don't think, unless, again, Trump pulls something out of his hat that we're not expecting. I don't see it happening, but it could happen. I mean, that's one area where you can do something at virtually no cost to us, but that will have obvious benefits, because this is money, again, that's just being thrown down a pit. Stop throwing down a pit and throwing it towards things, towards those real problems that need to be addressed within the country. Right.
Yeah. It's just amazing how much we spend, and it just how we can't even, protect against.
It's a terrific amount. I mean, it's a mind-bogglingly large figure, and there's no other country in the world, including Russia, which is involved in an existential war right now, but they still don't spend anywhere near the amount of money that we spend on our military. And again, the vast majority, I think, of that is waste. We just don't need to be doing this. We really don't.
Well, I'm not going to hold my breath for any changes. Yeah. I don't. It just seems very hard to cut military spending in the United States. It's
hard to cut spending in general. You were expressing hope that maybe a lot of these agencies would be streamlined. We have the DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency. Apparently Vivek has stepped out of that, but Musk is still a part of it. And maybe they'll do something. I hope so. I think there's a chance, but there have been previous presidents who, entered office with the same promise to cut back, and it's never happened. It's government spending has always increased. Even under those presidents like Reagan, who assured us that the opposite would happen.
Yeah, well, that's depressing. Okay, well, maybe we can move over to the Middle East just a little bit. And just, can you tell me a little bit how the ceasefire is going and this hostage deal? Like, what's happening right now? What's your assessment of the ceasefire?
Well, overall, it is holding. The Israelis did violate it. They actually, a sniper killed a child.
I think I saw that video.
But all in all, it is holding, and the hostages are being exchanged. I think there were how many were there? 5 female hostages, female soldiers.
So 5 or 3, I don't remember.
So it may have been 3, yeah. A lot of people noted, these women were in very good condition. They didn't show any signs of abuse, and I don't think they're claiming anything like that. And in contrast, the Palestinian, they call them prisoners or terrorists or whatever. I think it's really fair to call them hostages. They're people that had just been detained, arbitrarily held without charges. And the fact that, the Israelis have been doing this for many, many years, decades again, and they've accumulated a lot of these prisoners or hostages. And that was clearly one of the major motivations of the October 7th attack. And it was their declared justification for seizing the hostages, the Israeli hostages. You've got our hostages, and we'll give you, we'll release these hostages to you, but you have to release the ones that you seized to us, and we see that happening. It's it's still at an early stage. We're talking about relatively small numbers, that's 3 versus 50 or something, but it's going to increase. There's going to be further releases. I think on the West Bank, where a lot of these prisoners were returned, there were efforts to celebrate that were violently suppressed by the Israelis. They wouldn't let the Palestinians celebrate the return of their comrades. They fired into the crowds. I think it was rubber bullets and so forth. But they, it seemed like just a gratuitous, cruelty. There was just no need to do that, but they did that. The Israelis did.
So you said that the Palestinian prisoners were mistreated, malnourished when they came out, whereas what evidence of mistreatment was
just
there?
You look at them, you can see they're gaunt, or they have bruises or whatever. Yeah, this is what I've been told. I haven't actually looked at it carefully, but that's what a lot of people have claimed. And I think it's true. I mean, it's not just that the claims being made at this point, but it's kind of well known that in these detention facilities, all kinds of abuse take place. We know about horrible, rape, the sodomizing of that Palestinian prisoner. That was openly defended, again, on Israeli TV.
Right. So you're saying it's much better to be a prisoner or a hostage held by Hamas than it is to be a prisoner or hostage held by the Israelis.
Right. I think the only thing you can say is that the problem is if you're a prisoner or hostage held by Hamas, there's a real chance you might end up being killed by an Israeli bomb. And I think that's probably where most of those, there have been hostages who have been killed during the course of the conflict. But most likely, and I know that Hamas has stated that they were killed by Israeli bombs.
Do you think the reality, these things that you're telling me, just the idea of saying that it's better to be, you'd much rather be a hostage held by Hamas than by Israel, as long as you're not killed by Israel when you're a hostage of Hamas? It's just, will that break into the psyche of maybe not Americans, but is it breaking for the rest of the world?
Yeah.
Do they come to that conclusion? I mean,
I think it's just another piece of evidence, that again really reveals the very ugly face of Zionism, and that this is what we've seen throughout. It was always there for anybody who was paying close attention prior to October 7th, but after October 7th, it was just, if you were at all honest, if you didn't just insulate yourself within the Western bubble, you saw it, and you could not avoid seeing it. And this is just, just part of that. This has been, it's just sort of ever since October 7th, there's been, just a torrent of evidence, and it continues to this day. Evidence, again, pointing to the brutality of Zionism.
How does somebody like Stefanik become such a Zionist? Because I saw that she's a Catholic. Like, how does a Catholic, say that Zionism is her real religion in a way? I mean, she's, I don't understand how that happens to people. I mean, I understand Christian Zionism, I thought was more of a Protestant phenomena,
right?
Not so much within Catholicism.
Yeah.
It just seems very...
Right. You certainly, this is not the teaching of the Catholic Church, and the teaching of the Catholic Church is, is completely, more than inconsistent, is just completely in conflict with Christian Zionism. But individual Catholics, it's true. I've noticed that over the years, there are individual Catholics who become ardent Zionists. And it's just it's just out there. There's this, Zionism is a real cultural force. And people get converted by it. It does become something like a religion to them. They just identify totally with it. It's
right. They just say it's a biblical right. I almost feel like it's just because Israel is and Zion are mentioned in the Bible, they just assume yep, that's God's plan as a Christian. But it's deeper than that, clearly, right? But I mean, for a lot of people, maybe it's not that deep. They just adopt Zionism, but. It's just such an odd phenomena for me. If somebody that is a Christian, a Catholic, and then you say, yes, this is the biblical right of these Jews to go in and kill these people, take their land, doesn't seem very Christian to me.
Yeah, no, it's not at all Christian. First of all, Christian Zionism didn't even exist until the 19th century, and it was initially just very much a fringe phenomena. It wasn't until sometime in the middle of the 20th century that it became somewhat mainstream. It still wasn't, a mainstream point of view, but among certain Protestant sects, it became somewhat mainstream. And then it was really after the 67 war that it began to really take off in this country and become a force to reckon with. It's just not on many different levels, just looking at the, theological scriptural interpretations or whatever. I think it simply cannot be supported by any Christian reading of the Bible, but they have managed to wring it out of the Bible. But more importantly, perhaps it's just that you're talking about the killing. We just mentioned the sniper killing the child. As a Christian, how can you stand by? How can you support this? A lot of them, of course, don't really want to see it, and they believe what Fox News tells them, that they're just all animals and beasts over there. They're not really humans. But again, I mean, not even as a Christian, just as a human, how can you be okay with that? It's just no. It's just it is a black mark on, let's say, anybody, but I think particularly for a Christian or a Christian sect to associate themselves with this. Do you think that this will destroy some Christian sects in the long term? What Israel's done, will it destroy Judaism? And it's when we saw Max Blumenthal, right. He's made that accusation of Blinken's look what you've done to our religion, look what you've done. You have associated Judaism with genocide, with executing your own Holocaust, the Holocaust of our generation. That's a bad mark to be associated, because it's one thing if it's a nation, that was a Nazism group of ideology, but it's not a whole religion, that spreads across the whole, it's can Judaism survive what has happened or what is happening? Yeah, well, it's a good question. I don't know the answer to it, but it certainly, I think, Max Blumenthal is right. He said that Blinken, by his conduct, had associated Judaism with fascism. And he was outraged at that because Max Blumenthal himself is a Jew. But you can say, the same thing of, the Christian Zionists within this country too, is that they are putting at their own faith at risk, by going down this road. Let's just put it that way. And, I don't know how it's all going to end, but they too have put their churches at risk. This is a dangerous association. It's a deeply wrong association. It's just that it's protected by all these powerful media organs right now. But at some point, that protection may cease to be effective. Somewhere down the road, we'll see. Right now now that the ceasefire is in effect, the Hamas authorities are able to start digging through the rubble, and they've already uncovered dozens of bodies, so that, as we predicted, that body count will increase. And eventually, too, we'll start to get statistics on, the total number of deaths, the civilian deaths that were not directly caused by combat, but indirectly caused by combat. And all of that, again, like we've discussed earlier, is going to have an impact. It's going to have further blacken the name of Israel and its supporters around the world.
Yeah, it's crazy. The idea of, a whole religion being tainted is, it seems unprecedented. Have we had anything like this historically? Where we have?
Well, there are all kinds of atrocities have been carried out in the name of religion, but I think it was usually, it was clearly people, kings and generals who had their own ambitions and just, borrowed the name of Christianity or, of the Catholic Church or whatever for their own purposes. But it was not something that was, let's say, justified in terms of the faith itself. It's like, as a Christian, you must do this. But there are many Jews that are arguing. Obviously there are Jews that resist, that are anti-Zionists. They certainly are out there, and we have to acknowledge that. But there are many Jews that are saying that as Jews we must do this. As Jews we must ethnically cleanse Gaza. It's something that is required, by our God. I'm sure you can find instances of that in other times, but I just, in the last couple hundred years, I don't think we've seen anything like it.
Right. Yeah. I guess I just realized after I said that, you can go back to so many religious wars, the Crusades and everything like this.
The wars of religion in Europe were very bloody and led to the deaths of, many millions of people. And, it was the Catholics against the Protestants.
Right. It's just different being in a 21st century environment. I guess that's the main thing. That's like, but I thought we were past a lot of this stuff, but clearly we're not. Well, something just popped up on my computer that said, just a news flash. I just want to read it to you and see what you think. Okay. It says, this just popped up, said, Trump admits love for Russian people and offers Putin a deal. How are you feeling about things with Russia right now? Do you think we can see an end to this conflict?
I'm afraid that we won't.
Come on, Dad.
And I'm just going to say that, no, I think that's probably true. That, okay, one thing is Biden seemed to just have a visceral hatred of Russia. And that was true of many of the people around him, Blinken and Jake Sullivan and so many, Victoria Nuland. They just hated Russia. And it seems clear to me that Trump doesn't. And that's good. That maybe we'll stop going up the escalatory ladder. That's one possibility. But for all the various reasons that I've given, I don't think I need to repeat them now. I just don't think he can negotiate a solution. There's just nothing that he can offer that Russians can take that will be politically possible within the West.
But he said that he's just going to stop giving aid, so it's just going to collapse, right?
Well, we'll see. Well, we've heard, there are conflicting messages about that. Sometimes you hear that, and then you hear the opposite. Again, you hear that he's going to slap more sanctions on Russia. It wasn't too long ago that he said he was going to, actually just turn up the pressure on Putin by flooding, Ukraine with arms. I don't think he knows what he's talking about. Biden did every effort he could to flood Ukraine with arms. It's just that we don't have any arms, or we don't have them in sufficient numbers to give Ukraine anymore. So he tends to be all over the map. He likes to talk tough, but I think it is true. He just doesn't have that hatred, and that's good. I just don't. Again, I think there's just sort of like these structural impediments. It's just like no U.S. president, whatever his intentions, can really admit to defeat. You cave in to the Russians. That's how it's going to be viewed, and there's just going to be. There's going to be a huge chorus of people claiming that, now we know he's a Russian agent. He's weak. He's given in. He's made this deal with the devil. All of that will happen, and I don't think he can afford that cost. I'm sorry. I just don't think that changes, even if he really wants to. If he really wants to go down that road.
Yeah, I guess the thing that gives me hope is just when I do see Trump, it seems like he just really doesn't give a damn a lot of the times. He's able to handle a lot of, mud thrown at him. Because he's,
on a certain level, that's true. We'll see. It's just that, okay, we'll see. We'll see. I just, again, I remember his first term, and he ended up caving in on so many different things, especially in the area of foreign policy. Maybe this is a new Trump. Maybe he's learned his lesson. Maybe he'll just say, I don't give a damn. But I don't think, again, I think he's like every president, virtually every president that has we've ever had in the United States. He is mainly concerned with his domestic policies. And if he starts to get a big fight from the foreign policy establishment, and he will, he'll just say, forget it. It's not worth it. This is costing me, it's distracting me from my domestic agenda. I think that's what many, many presidents end up doing. They do have, they enter the office with some good intentions, and then they find that, that this foreign policy establishment is just immovable, or, it's going to they're going to have to go to war with it. And they just decide it's just not worth it. It's going to end up, again, detracting from my efforts on the domestic front. So forget it. I think that's what we'll see.
Well, why is the foreign policy establishment immovable? Doesn't he have the ability to, fire people and appoint people that align his views? Like what we saw with this Domino guy that doesn't want to go to war with Iran and wants to have more aid into Gaza.
Yeah. Right. There are a few bright points right there. And then, all in all, though Tulsi Gabbard has unfortunately caved in on some very important issues. We've talked about Israel, but also on the FISA, I think, act that enables the U.S. government to spy on U.S. citizens. She caved in on that too. But still, all in all, I think, she is a positive appointment. The thing is, though, that most of the people that he's appointed, and then most of the people that, just stay there regardless of who's president, are part of the blob, the foreign policy establishment, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. And they're just very experienced at pursuing their own objectives. I think that's what they've done. That's what they feel like it's their God-given right, and that presidents come and go, but they're there. And there's just a lot of ways for them to sabotage, to subvert, whatever the president really wants to do. It's not that he can't, but it just becomes a major battle. At the end, he has to go, I think, deep into the bureaucracies and start replacing lots of people, and that's hard. And it's not clear that he really has his own people to replace them. Because then, unfortunately, it's just like this whole apparatus, starting with the universities, creates people that, that are global hegemonists. And so there are hundreds of thousands out there, and there just aren't, unfortunately, the anti-hegemonists are greatly outnumbered and also outgunned.
Yeah, I can't help but feel slightly optimistic. I don't know, I guess it's just because Biden was so bad and Trump is just there's so many things that are being done now. Whatever's going to happen, it's going to be an interesting couple of years.
Yeah. Well, again, like I mentioned, it's Jeffrey Sachs, who's no fan of Trump whatsoever. He admits that at least with Trump, there's a chance. And I'll say the same thing. I don't expect anything significantly different, but with him, there is a chance for the reasons that I've given. And so, there is reason to be very cautiously, slightly hopeful.
Wow.
That's as far as I'll go.
You. Wow. Strong words. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to mention? We didn't really touch about what's going on in Russia or Ukraine much or anything. Is there any big updates you want to give before we sign off? Or
not really. No. It's more of the same on the battlefronts there.
Okay. All right. Then we'll end it there then. Okay, Dad. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.